Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Natalina Martiniello. I am a white blind woman in my mid-30s with dark hair. My talk is titled, It's Not What We See, It's Who We See, the Power of Inclusive Technology and Digital Practices to Elevate Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility for Blind and Low Vision Leaders in Science. I will be introducing a toolkit that I co-developed alongside researchers with and without visual impairments on conference accessibility. The recommendations in this toolkit touch on those related to digital accessibility and inclusive technology, but also broader themes of equity and inclusion. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. In 2000, Hamilton and colleagues published a case study about a 63-year-old congenitally blind woman who had been reading Braille throughout her life. After a stroke, lesions caused damage to the occipital cortex responsible for visual processing. Although the somatosensory cortex responsible for processing tactile information was not affected, this woman could no longer read Braille. Although she could feel the Braille symbols, she could not interpret nor make sense of them. Through increasingly sophisticated neuroimaging technology and techniques, we have come to better understand the cortical plasticity that is observable among experienced Braille readers. The brain literally adapts to adjust to these new circumstances, and the visual cortex is recruited during Braille reading. These principles will not be new to those who have a background in neuroscience. Braille reading is training dependent. The more we use it, the more this cortical plasticity will occur. I raise this here, however, for a different reason. What may seem fixed or typical to one person may not be that for another. Clearly, there are multiple perspectives and approaches through which we can interpret the world around us. So this raises the question, how well do we collectively do to ensure that this diversity is meaningfully included and valued within all aspects of science? As we increasingly place long overdue emphasis on equity, diversity, and inclusion, how often do we collectively ensure that disability, an identity that intersects with age, gender, race, and other lived experiences for over 1.3 billion people worldwide, is included within these broader EDI discussions? Here I show a portrait of the array of technologies and tools that blind and low vision individuals may use to access information, depending on level of vision, preference, or environmental factors such as color, contrast, lighting, and the size of text. Reading methods include standard print, large print or magnification, Braille on paper, or Braille through electronic devices that automatically transfer what is visually on the screen into Braille through pins that rise and fall to form Braille symbols, and text-to-speech software that will read information aloud. For navigation in the environment, this can include the white cane, a guide dog, optical devices, or no mobility tool at all. In fact, a majority of people with visual impairments have an invisible disability. This implies that if we only plan for digital accessibility in our classes, conferences, and events during those times when we can see disability, we are excluding a large portion of the population, including many older adults who may not self-identify as having a disability, but still benefit from increased print size. The movement towards universal design has been an important step forward towards greater inclusivity. In a 2018 survey that I conducted with 466 participants between the ages of 18 and 80 who self-identified as either blind or low vision, we found that mainstream devices such as smartphones and tablets are increasingly replacing the use of specialized or traditional visual aids, although those tools still also have their place. These mainstream tools incorporate built-in accessibility features that can be activated out of the box and that don't require additional third-party software. Universal design is when we proactively plan for the natural diversity that exists among all people. While this is important for people with disabilities, it also often benefits everyone. For example, many sighted individuals use Siri to compose a message. Despite these technological advancements, the unemployment rate for people with visual impairments remains at a staggering 70% across global North countries. I show a table pulled from a book chapter I co-wrote on employment and visual impairment here to illustrate this. The employment rate for people with visual impairments is lower than that of the general population and for many other disability groups. Importantly, this unemployment rate has remained relatively static since the 70s, despite legal and technological changes. This is especially true in the sciences, where people with visual impairments are significantly underrepresented. A recent study indicates that grant funding for NIH applicants with a disability declined from 1.9 in 2008 to 1.2% in 2018. This percentage is lower for applicants who self-identify as having a visual impairment. Scientific conferences are an integral part of careers for researchers and trainees. Attending these events enables the sharing of research findings, provides opportunities for networking, and for fostering new collaborations. Barriers encountered by individuals with visual impairments include those related to accessibility, access to information at conferences, and ableism. For example, the tendency to consider people with disabilities as patients and recipients of care. With this in mind, I'd like to briefly describe a collaboration between Johns Hopkins Disability Health Research Center, led by Dr. Bonnie Sweener, and members of the core team of the International Network of Researchers with Visual Impairments and their allies, INOVA, which I co-lead. The goal of this initiative was to co-develop an initial toolkit on how to design accessible conferences for participants with visual impairments. This began with a commentary that we published in JAMA Ophthalmology on conference accessibility. The toolkit includes guidelines for both conference organizers and presenters, and recommendations for before, during, and after a conference. I will briefly highlight some of these recommendations, focusing especially on those related to digital accessibility and inclusive technology, but I encourage you to access the full toolkit online. Okay, so what are some of the guidelines for organizers? It's really important to meaningfully include disability experts as part of the conference organizing team and to consult with disability-led organizations. There are some resources to help with this outreach in the toolkit. This also includes thinking about who is recruited to manage the online conference platform and ensuring that they bring knowledge of the existing web accessibility guidelines. Select an accessible venue. So what does this mean? This includes reserving rooms that are close together and easy to locate, placing high contrast and tactile indicators and changes of elevation, for example, stairs, including braille and large print signage to assist with navigation, and written descriptions to help locate key areas such as the registration table in the conference package available to all participants. Next, ensure that the information you provide to participants For example, websites, forms, social media announcements are accessible. Guidelines for producing accessible guidelines documents are also available in the toolkit. But this includes, for example, ensuring the accessibility of images in your documents. For example, images on social media announcements to promote an event. In PowerPoint, you can right-click on an image to include alt text or a written description that is accessible to participants with visual impairments who use assistive technology. And there are instructions for including alt text descriptions for images on social media as well, including Facebook and Twitter if you look in the settings of those social media platforms. Next, you should ask about accessibility both in the registration form as well as a post-conference feedback survey to help plan and inform for future events. During the event, be sure to introduce yourself by name and role and use name tags that are easy to visually see. For example, high contrast and a minimum 18-point font. I include an example of an accessible name tag on this slide. Similarly, include instructions on producing accessible PowerPoints and poster presentations in the author submission guidelines for all speakers. For conference speakers, ask about guidelines you should follow to ensure the accessibility of your slides and posters and to elevate that inclusion is important to you. For example, including image descriptions, using good contrast, white on black or black on white, and an easy to read font such as Verdana or Arial, as well as captioning. During a PowerPoint presentation, describe relevant images that are important for understanding the message you're communicating. For example, for the figure on this slide, rather than stating we can clearly see which option receives the most votes, you can instead say that option A, 98%, was far more popular than option B, 2%. During a poster presentation, identify yourself by name when an individual stands at your poster. Consider producing business cards that include both print and braille. This ensures the accessibility of your business card, but again also elevates the importance of inclusion for others. And there are resources for obtaining accessible business cards in the toolkit. Consider including a QR code on your poster so that participants can access your content in an accessible electronic format online. It's easy in a 15-minute presentation to oversimplify the theme of accessibility and inclusion. But of course, this is only one small snapshot of a much bigger theme. The toolkit also highlights other recommendations that move beyond accessibility and that touch on, for example, the language used to describe disability at many scientific conferences. For example, avoiding terms such as people suffering with blindness. As a next step, we've launched an international conference survey to explore conference accessibility that will inform future iterations of this toolkit. The toolkit in its current form is already available in multiple languages. There are many people with disabilities who bring lived experience, including researchers and scientists who are doing important work in this space, as well as allies who are committed to accessibility and inclusion. I'd like to end by highlighting some examples of effective allyship, what we can all do to practice greater accessibility and inclusion. Listen and learn from people with disabilities who bring lived experience. For example, you can follow the hashtag A11Y, which stands for the word accessibility, to learn more about these conversations. Read and listen to first-hand perspectives. For example, the book Haben, the first deafblind woman to graduate from Harvard Law, or another fantastic resource is a podcast included, the Disability Equity Podcast. It's also really important to practice the lessons we learn. regardless of whether you know who in the audience will benefit from these accessibility and inclusion practices. Technology is only one aspect of broader inclusion. Technology can either increase or reduce the level of accessibility and inclusion that others experience. The social model of disability highlights that disabling barriers are often created by environments that are not proactively designed to include everyone. We collectively hold the power to either eliminate or even minimize many of the disabling barriers that persist through our actions and perceptions. With that, I would like to acknowledge all of our collaborators, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference.